Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Eversolo DMP-A10, which is a full-width digital streamer, streaming DAC, and analog pre-amplifier. And I think it's this Chinese manufacturer's most luxurious type of product like this to date. So like the DMP-A6 and the DMP-A8 that came before it, the DMP-A10 runs a customized version of Android, and that OS's touchscreen interface and its partnering control app gives us a choice of VU meters and spectrum analyzers should we not want to see cover art and metadata when listening to music. And the internal DSP manages the two independent subwoofer outputs and Eversolo's EvoTune room compensation. And if we look at the back panel, we get more hardwired connectivity than we can shake a stick at. So we get 3 sets of analog inputs, including balanced XLR. We get the same complement in terms of analog outputs. For digital outputs, we get coax, Toslink, and USB. And for digital inputs, we get 2 coax, 2 Toslink, USB, and the all-important HDMI eARC. Crikey, that is a lot, isn't it? Now that strange looking socket that sits to the left of the gigabit LAN socket is an SFP fiber Ethernet input, but I mainly streamed music to the A10 over Wi-Fi and standard Ethernet. And let's get it out of the way early. The customizable screen, yes, screen on the volume wheel is absolutely bonkers, but in a good way. So today we're going to put the A10 through its paces with an emphasis on its sound quality as a streaming DAC. So the DAC circuit here is ESS based, which is a change up from the A8's AKM chipset. And so we'll assess the A10's audible prowess with music you might read about in Uncut Magazine and at Hi-Fi News.
This episode is brought to you by Marantz, makers of the ISA award-winning Model M1 streaming amplifier. Click the link below for more info.
There's no doubt about it. This is the most attractive DMP from Eversolo to date. But it's also the most expensive. The A10 sells for 3,800 euros in Europe or 4,000 US dollars in the USA. So I think we get what we pay for, right? And it certainly would seem so from the build quality, which is very, very good indeed. The side panel heat sinks, which actually don't need to do much heat sinking, add to the overall visual appeal. But this Eversolo story is, I think, far from simple, because I think there are 3 distinct ways to look at the DMP-A10. Firstly, as a digital-only transport, then as a DAC with hardwired and streaming inputs, and then lastly, as a digital and analog preamplifier. So let's break down these use cases one by one. At 6.5 inches, the A10's touchscreen is half an inch larger than the touchscreens found on the A6 and the A8. I think they're 6 inches each. And we also find a very nicely styled Bluetooth remote in the A10's box, but I suspect most people will use the Eversolo Control smartphone app and its screen mirroring functionality to interface with the A10, especially when an Eversolo streamer's #1 draw card, I think, is the bit-perfect handling of Apple Music's CD quality and, in some cases, high-res streams. Now, why did I say in some cases? Well, that's because there are 2 Apple Music apps within the Eversolo touchscreen interface. So firstly, there's the original Google Play Store derived Apple Music app, which does do high res. And then there's Eversolo's newly customized version of that app, which I think is slightly slicker, but it comes with the restriction that it tops out at CD quality. And it's that slicker version of the app that appears as a native Apple Music integration inside Eversolo's Control app. So for all but high-res enthusiasts, this obviates the need to mirror the A10 screen inside the app, which I think is bloody superb. And the A10 gives us apps for a whole slew of other streaming services, some of which also appear as 2 versions. I've covered those in my A6 and A10 reviews, I think, so I won't repeat myself here, and I'll link to those videos in the show notes below. Besides, if you're a Tidal, a Qobuz or a Spotify user, I reckon you'll be using its Connect service to stream to the A10, or you'll be using AirPlay, which is version 1 AirPlay here, or you might, in extreme cases, be using Bluetooth, because all of those are supported by the A10, allowing us to stay in our chosen streaming service's native app without having to reach for Eversolo's control app. And if you're wondering why I don't talk about Amazon Music, I've written about that recently on my website, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes below. Then there's the Roon Ready input, which is the one I used more than any other. And I built a playlist in Tidal for this review to play back through Roon to the A10. So let me just put my coffee down, because I've got my phone here with the playlist on it. So that playlist starts with Aztec Camera's cover of Cyndi Lauper's True Colors. It came out on a B-side, I think originally on the back of a single that came out on the back of the album Stray. Not my favorite Aztec Camera album, not by a long shot. That would be Highland Hard Rain, and secondly Knife. Second track is some dub techno from Shinichi Atobi. It's called Regret. Then we've got an absolute classic. We've got Voodoo Ray by a guy called Gerald. Then more electronic music, Making It Whistle by Thomas Fehlman. Then some, I guess, fairly euphoric indie rock from Morrissey called First of the Gang to Die. That's possibly his greatest solo single, I think. That's probably a controversial take, isn't it? Then we've got The Boy with a Gun by David Sylvian. I'm not a massive Sylvian fan, but I quite like that track, but I have to be in the right mood for it. And then we've got Borders by The Whitest Boy Alive, which is electronica with a vocal from Erlend Oy from Kings of Convenience, I believe. Then we've got the main theme from The Good, The Bad and The Ugly, which I chuck into playlist every now and again, just for some orchestral related stuff. Then Into My Arms from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. I think most people would know that. And then finally, some very moody, dark and ever-expanding electronica from an outfit called Craven Faults called Long Stoop. So those are the songs that I mainly use to assess the A10. And yes, I played those back through Roon, and I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. Let's dig into the A10's room correction here, because the filters generated by Eversolo's EvoTune can be piped out of the A10's digital outputs as well as its analog outputs, and in both cases with volume control optionally applied. Now, Eversolo sent me its EM1 measurement microphone that connects directly to a smartphone's USB-C port, and the idea is that an external microphone like that will take a more accurate reading of the test tones sent out of the A10 and into our loudspeakers. Now, unfortunately, my Asus Zenfone 10 wouldn't register the EM1's USB connection, neither would a Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, and neither would an Apple iPad. So I had to fall back to the Zenfone's inbuilt microphone, which did a decent job of executing the room correction, but only when I remembered to point the phone's bottom end, so its microphones, at the ceiling. Now, the EvoTune process is fully automatic and wizard driven, with the resulting FIR filters loaded into the A10 at the click of a button. And they are preceded by a parametric EQ in the DSP chain should we wish to apply any tweaks. Now, for me, EvoTune improved soundstage focus, but also caused a drop in music's sort of general push and shove. And as we'll see, dynamics are a quality the A10 can ill afford to lose. But your room will sound different from mine, so you will almost certainly see different results. But please remember that room correction software like EvoTune cannot fix a room's reverb problem. For that, we still need physical treatments, no ifs, no buts. And that brings us to another but. Because if you only want to tap the A10's digital outputs to use it as a digital source, why not save yourself $2,000 and buy Eversolo's newly announced T8 digital transport? Because It offers an almost identical touchscreen. It gives us the same OS, the same streaming smarts, and the same DSP functionality as the A10. Not only that, the T8 adds AES, EBU, and I2S outputs to the mix. Now, using the A10 as a streaming DAC is where we discover its core personality. Now, I can't offer you a comparison to the A8 because that's now in Lisbon. But here in Berlin, I connected the A10's line level RCA outputs to the T+A Symphonia integrated, where I heard it as rich, full, super smooth, and very nicely refined, just as we would expect from a DAC selling for north of $3,000, right? Now, in these areas, the Eversolo is a clear step up from the extremely popular and far less costly Wiim Ultra DAC, which by contrast sounds thinner and harder. And in case you were wondering, the Eversolo is richer sounding than the T+A's internal DAC, but it cannot match the German on wide-eyed crystal clarity. But I have a niggle, right? The Eversolo sounds a bit too restrained with more dynamically charged music, especially when sat next to something like the Mola Tambaqui. And that's with the room correction on the A10 turned off. Now, that makes the A10 a terrific choice for anyone listening to Aztec Camera's somewhat maudlin cover of Cyndi Lauper's True Colours, but less so for someone like me wanting to punch the air when firing up Morrissey's raucous First of the Gang to Die. The A10 lends music a certain kind of lushness, and it's very much pipe and slippers in front of the fire with Nick Cave's Into My Arms, which is no bad thing. But it robs the Morrissey song of the last few drops of excitement. I then compared, side by side, the DMP-A10 to the best DAC I've ever heard, and that's the Grimm MU2. Now, in this double-blind comparison, Olaf heard the A10 as slightly leaner in the low end and brighter up top. Now, that brightness kind of lifts the listener's head, and you could probably EQ some of it away. But no amount of EQ will make the A10 sound as easeful as the Grimm DAC, because easefulness is one of the standout qualities of the best digital sources. Now, I must stress, as always, that the differences between the Eversolo and the Grimm as a DAC are not night and day. Nothing is getting destroyed, nothing is getting blown out of the water. So the A10 offers what I call close but no cigar levels of performance as a DAC, but it's a long way from the MU2 on price. That makes the Eversolo by far the better value of the two units, especially when we consider all that the A10 can do that the MU2 cannot. Now, trouble arrived when I put the A10 up against the Chord Hugo2 and its to-go attachment. Now, together, they sell for €3,900. Now, the Chord combo is a much more compact streaming DAC with far fewer features than the Eversolo. There's no room correction, there's no subwoofer management, and there's no balanced connectivity. But the Hugo 2 has an exceedingly good sounding headphone amplifier on board, and the A10 doesn't do headphones at all. And this transportable brick contrasts the A10 as microdynamically tamer in its handling of Craven Foltz's long stoop. Similarly, Shinichi Itobi's Regret cast the A10 as the more understated sounding of the two decoders, and that track also shows the A10 soundstage as less internally spacious than the Chords. Having said that, the Eversolo sounds wonderfully refined when playing David Sylvian's Boy with a Gun, and it's also a little meatier sounding than the to go with the Hugo 2. But again, nothing is being destroyed, blown out of the water. No, that's just nonsense. And I think most people would be more than happy with either DAC here, but I think the Chord has the audible edge despite being wholly outgunned on functionality. But if you only wish to use the A10 as a streaming DAC, why not pair the T8 that I just mentioned with a DAC of your choice? Because the T8 sells for 1,400 euros, which effectively gives you 2,000 euros for a third-party DAC before you blow past the A10's asking price. Now make no mistake, the A10 is a proper preamplifier and not just a DAC with a volume control attached. And Eversolo tells me that it features a 10 dB gain stage, and that might be why I don't hear a sound that's lacking body when playing directly into the Mola Perca power amplifier, as I do when I use the Wiim Ultra DAC as a preamplifier into that same power amp. Now, on top of the A10's streaming and hardwired digital inputs, we also get 3 analog inputs, so 2 sets of RCA and 1 set of balanced. And to satisfy the purists, the ADC on those analog inputs can be turned off in the app, but doing so means passing up on room correction and bass management, because preamplifier mode is also where we get to make use of the A10's software managed subwoofer outputs. We set the crossover in the app or on the touchscreen. Not only that, there are subwoofer and loudspeaker delay options to help us with the subwoofer's time alignment, which is very, very important for many people. And the HDMI ARC input also comes into its own here, because we can use our TV's remote or an Apple TV remote to change the volume on the A10 when watching TV. And that volume control is a relay switch resistor ladder, which clicks with the changes to give the knob feel a little extra something. And Eversolo should be applauded for their super sophisticated control app, and I think it is rivaled only by Wiim's, although I can see how those less immersed in app culture could find the UI confusing. I know my dad would. But any hi-fi company struggling to code its own streaming app, I think, should talk to Eversolo or to Wiim about licensing opportunities. Because like Wiim, I see Eversolo more as a software company than a hi-fi company. So now we arrive at our final destination. And that destination is a bit of a cul-de-sac, because only when the Eversolo DMP-A10 is used as a streaming and analog preamplifier does it properly earn its asking price. And in this role, it can't match the Grimm MU2 on sound quality. The DMP-A10 lacks the Grimm's final words on transparency and microdynamic elasticity. But this audible shortfall is more than offset by the Eversolo's large touchscreen and its bass management and room correction and its HDMI eARC, it does eARC as well as ARC input, and its other digital inputs and outputs, because the MU2 doesn't have any digital outputs. And also the A10 outstrips the MU2 on an impossibly broad array of streaming apps, including the best CD quality Apple Music integration in any hi-fi product. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe according to your preference, and don't forget to hit us up on Patreon for behind the scenes coverage and playlists for every video we've made since 2020. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Okay, let's wrap this video with one more thought. Eversolo's control app is now available for Android TV streamers and the Apple TV, although I did see it was called something else on the Apple TV. Now those apps put whatever is being played on the A10 or A8 or A6 or Play or T8 on our TV. But unlike the Eversolo unit's own touchscreen, the TV's output is clearly readable from the listening position, and it gives us something proper to look at when we're streaming music. Now, more impressively, Eversolo's TV-centric Now Playing screen, to me, looks better than the third-party app that I otherwise would use for Roon. It's called TV Remote. And the Eversolo app shows us cover art and metadata for all of the streaming inputs, not just Roon. I think that's absolutely splendid. And lastly, yes, I'm sure there is an A10 feature that I did not mention. Now, that's not because I don't know about it or don't care about it. It's because when making videos like these, I need to decide what needs to go into the video and what needs to be left out in order to keep it a manageable length.